Have you ever heard your own voice when you're certain you were alone? Imagine you're in your house, just settling down for the night when you hear it, your voice, calling to you from another room. What would you do? Would you go see who or what is calling? Because this happened to someone I know, and the ending is something I don't think they'll ever forget. The story starts with James, a pretty ordinary guy in his early 30s who just moved into an old but charming house. The previous owner had sold it quickly and at a low price. It was such a good deal that he didn't bother asking why. He loved that house during the day, but at night, alone, something felt off. It was subtle at first. Shadows seemed to stretch a little too long, rooms felt too cold, and sometimes he thought he'd hear faint whispers coming from nowhere, but he brushed it off as nerves, stress from long hours at work, until the night he heard his own voice. It was nearly midnight, and James was reading in bed. The rest of the house was silent. There was nothing but the soft hum of the heater. He started to drift to sleep, eyelids growing heavy. Then he heard it. At first he thought it was a dream, a trick of his sleepy brain, but he shook himself awake and listened. Silence. He laughed to himself, feeling silly, but then he heard it again, clear, distinct, unmistakable, a voice, his own voice. It wasn't coming from outside or even from a neighbor's place. It was coming from inside the house, and this time the voice was even louder, beckoning him.
James, come here. I want to show you something.
He thought to himself, I know I'm stressed, but just in case, James started an audio recording on his phone, thinking I can get a good laugh at myself in the morning. But he just couldn't shake it. Something didn't feel right. A chill ran down his spine. Heart pounding, he forced himself out of bed, clinging to the belief that it was just his imagination. But the voice came again, urgent, pleading.
James, please come here.
He followed the sound, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. The voice was coming from the living room, and with each step he took, it grew louder.
James,
As he reached the doorway,
come
he
here.
hesitated. His own voice spoke again,
James,
now just on the other
please
side of
come
the door.
here.
His heart hammered in his chest as he slowly pushed the door open. But there was nothing there. The room was empty, just as he'd left it. A sense of relief started to settle over him. Maybe he was just tired. Then he remembered his phone was still recording. When he played it back, the whisper was faint, almost like the house itself was breathing. He told himself it was the wind, though he knew every door and window was firmly shut. But as he turned to leave, he heard it again, whispering right behind him.
James, don't leave.
He whipped around, but again, the room was empty. This time, though, his own voice was different. It sounded off, like someone was trying to imitate him but didn't quite get it right. It was slower, almost distorted.
Don't leave. I need to show you something.
His breath caught in his throat, and he began to back away, his hands trembling. But before he could take another step, the voice shifted. It wasn't coming from the living room anymore. It was coming from the basement. He could hear it echoing up the stairs from the basement, like a whisper from the depths of the house. Against his better judgment, he moved towards the basement door. He didn't want to go down there. Everything in his body screamed to leave, to get out. But something pulled him forward. The basement stairs creaked under his weight as he descended, the voice growing louder and more desperate. At the bottom, the lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the walls. The voice had stopped, but he could feel something. A presence, almost. He stood there breathing heavily, his eyes scanning the darkness. And then he saw it. In the corner of the basement was a tall mirror that he hadn't noticed before, but the reflection staring back wasn't quite right. It was him, but wrong. The figure smiled, its mouth stretching too wide, its eyes dark and hollow. James grabs his phone from his shirt pocket to turn on the flashlight, but saw he was still recording.
I need to show you
whispered.
something.
And without another sound, the figure in the mirror stepped out. James drops his phone and stumbled back, too terrified to scream. The figure that looked exactly like him started to move closer, smiling that empty, sinister smile.
What are you?
He managed to whisper. The figure leaned in, its voice barely audible but unmistakable.
I'm you, James. The part of you that you'll never escape.
It reached out, and as its hand touched his shoulder, a sharp coldness ran through his body. James could barely breathe, and in that moment, as he struggled, he could hear it whisper one last thing.
Welcome home.
The last entry in his recording was brief, his panicked breath a whispered no, and then silence. James was never seen again. His friends, his family, they searched everywhere but found no trace of him. Only one strange thing remained, an old mirror, covered in dust, in the basement of an empty house. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened in that house, but James's phone was later found lying on the floor, covered in dust, with that final recording, his own voice left as an eerie warning to anyone who might step inside. And if you go close enough to that mirror, people say that you might hear a voice that sounds just like your own, whispering,
Come here. I need to show you something.
If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a kind comment below. It will be much appreciated, and maybe I'll keep you safe from the mirror in the empty room. At least until next time.